Daniel D. Jewell was my first employer in the legal field back in 1981. I think of him often. He's left quite an impression in my life, both legally and otherwise. I'd probably say two or three things about Dan Jewell. The first thing, obviously, when I started working for him and learned throughout my employment was he was meticulous in detail. One of the things that Dan Jewell would do for trial was just initially, when a client would come in or a file would come in, he was immediately thinking about the big picture, the theme or the theory of the case, and he would develop that. So we would start with the pleadings. If we were, on a rare occasion, if we were the plaintiff in a case, or more often when we were representing the defendant in a case, the pleadings were meticulous. There was no detail that was too small, and he would start out with the jury instructions. How was the jury going to be instructed in a case? And he would develop the pleadings and develop the theme of the case through that. At depositions, he was meticulous in detail. That was one of the very first things that I learned for him, and it was at those depositions that he would be able to nail down the other side as to what the facts are, what the theme is, and he would hold them to task. The other thing that I remember about Dan is he would brief every case. He thought it was really important to assist the trial court, if you would, as far as jury instructions or what the rulings might ultimately be. And it wouldn't matter if it was a county court case or a district court case. He wanted to have his say on behalf of his client into the court before any decision was made or before the trial started. So that was those were the two or three things that I remember about Dan. The other thing and I use this so often in talking with younger lawyers. I remember I'd only been working there for about 2 or 3 months, and it was in context of a particular case, but he said, you know, Gerard, it takes 20 to 25 years to build a reputation, and it only takes 5 minutes to lose one. And that is absolutely true. I was asked by clients to do certain things, be placed in situations to do certain things. I remember those words of Dan Jewell, and I pass those on to many because I've seen heartbreaking cases in which lawyers have considered things or done things and have lost a reputation in a matter of minutes, one that they've built for years. And Daniel D. Jewell was the one that placed those words in my mind. I mean, his message is huge, and it was very important to him to train younger lawyers. And when we're talking about every aspect of trial here, you know, Dan Jewell's advice rings through. You know, in picking a jury selection is tremendously important, and it's oftentimes overlooked. But Dan Jewell, this is back in the old days before you had jury consultants or anything else. Dan Jewell, if he had a case out in O'Neill, Nebraska, or Ainsworth, Nebraska, would go to the clerk of the district court or others that he knew in that community, and he'd have the list of prospective jurors, and he would want to know where they went to church, what they did they drink. I mean, he would have an entire background on him. He didn't need a jury consultant. He would use the localities, and that still happens day to day. It's important for young lawyers to know that prospective jurors, they should know them absolutely going into the case, and then know what type of questions you're going to be asking during voir dire.
I'm a lawyer in Lincoln. In 1969, I started my practice. About 1 year into it, I went with my senior partner, who was a very good trial lawyer, a guy named Bob Barlow, and we went to Platte County to try a lawsuit. And it was a major case, and Bob had a big briefcase, and I was carrying the briefcase. And he was a slight guy, and so I was doing him a favor and respecting my senior partner. And as we walked up the courthouse steps, there's Dan Jewell standing at the top, and he was the opposing lawyer. And the first thing Dan said was, "Hello, Barlow, how the hell are you doing?" And so Barlow and Dan Jewell had a nice little visit, and then Jewell turned to me and said, "And who in the hell are you?" And I explained that I'm Kyle Johnson, and I'm just with Bob and just joined the firm a year ago, still carrying that heavy briefcase. Next thing he said, he looked me in the eye and he said, "What the hell are you doing carrying his briefcase?" So that was my first initiation to Dan Jewell. And we spent 2 days up in Platte County District Court trying that lawsuit, so I saw him go head-to-head with Barlow, and it was a wonderful initiation for me into the trial practice. They both became American College of Trial Lawyers Fellows, and I joined them a number of years later, and he graciously invited me into that organization and fellowship. He then was the president of the Bar Association, and I worked with him as the president of the Nebraska State Bar Foundation. He was always gracious, but again, that gregarious, large personality that jurors loved, and I could see why he was a very successful lawyer, not only in Norfolk, but throughout the northeast part of our state. He was a wonderful mentor, a great guy to lead the Bar Association, lead the Bar Foundation, and it's because of the Bar Foundation that he gave this marvelous grant, over $500,000, to put on the Dan Jewell Trial Institute, and that was to provide training and background for young trial lawyers in the state of Nebraska. And this is an important institute because most trials are not taking place now because of mediation. But we're preserving that art, and in the case that we have here, it's a wills and trust case, and those cases don't settle, and they need to have good, competent representation. So the Jewell Institute is serving a great purpose, and it was great to know Dan Jewell. He tried enough lawsuits, had enough experience that he could judge people, he could pick a jury, he knew people, and I watched him in that trial picking a jury, and he was folksy, he was open, he obviously was well liked, and the type of guy you want to spend time with. Great guy to spend a drink with.
So there's a picture of Jewell over here. We have a little memorial for Dan, and I got a call yesterday from Cinda, who's really could put us all down for as far as drawing wills. And she said, somebody stole Jewell's picture. And I said, well, we'll find it again. So I grew up on a farm south of Meadow Grove, Nebraska, which is right west of Norfolk. So Norfolk's about 30,000 people roughly. And I'd never seen a lawyer in my life. And I had a political science degree. And so I didn't know what to, as you may, if any of you have them, feel real sorry for you because you can't do anything with it, okay? And so my business person said, you need to go to law school, which at that point was just a couple houses over from where I was in. And so I went to law school. During that time, I sat right next to Rod Confer, who is a fabulous lawyer and now retired, and we had a lawyer come, and they were talking to us, and I said to Rod, did you see that guy from Ogallala? And he said, yes. I said, did you see he had a sport coat on? Because I had the picture of lawyers, they always wore three-piece black suits. And so when I didn't know where I'd go, and I got out of law school, and I got this letter from Dan Jewell because he'd helped my dad when a wagon fell on my dad's foot and injured it. And so Dan was on me, and I came up, and I met somebody, a lawyer, who had a sense of humor, and that was Jewell. And I was always impressed by that. So I did go with him and practice with him for probably 40 years. And as a result, when he decided that he was sure he wasn't going to die, but when he figured out maybe he might, he asked me to do his trust. And Doris had been a really good friend. And he said, I want to do something with the foundation. And I don't know exactly what to do. So we talked about that. And at the time, while I was growing up with Jewell, he sent me to a trial institute that was in Chicago called Goldstein. Goldstein was an evidence person, and you would get videotaped, and there was all kinds of things. I obviously didn't learn anything there, but it was wonderful. It was a really wonderful place and a really wonderful way to do it. Now, there's several of those now, but Dan loved Goldstein. We had this old book of Goldstein's up in the library, and if we had a question, Jewell would say, "Go get Goldstein." I said, "You know, that's 30 years old." He said, "It's still good." And so we patterned this, and when we started talking about, well, how does this money get used, the idea was, as was mentioned, that it really is about learning by doing. And I've been a part, and early on Doris says we need a smart aleck witness, and somehow she chose me, okay? And only that's not the word she used, but and so I have had great fun working with everybody, because primarily all we do now is write the documents that are the subject of litigation here today. And as a result, I get a perspective by seeing everybody, and each year it's great fun to see, and great fun to see you either examine or cross-examine me and learn things myself, which I think every person who draws a will or a trust or a power of attorney ought to come and see the problems that are created by the documents. So, the fact scenario that's here is amazing, because it's so different interpretations that can be given. So I know Dan would love it, and I asked for several, somebody asked for several stories about Jewell. I said the one that struck me most was that he was what a negotiator he was. I went one summer, I went to Harvard Law School for continuing education, and one of the speakers was the man who had negotiated the release of the Iran hostages, and he'd written several books, and I think Getting to Yes is one of his books. And I listened, and you know, it was like, I don't know, a couple, 3 months, and every time he'd say something, it was something Jewell had taught me. So from a negotiation standpoint, it was very cool. Okay, I could stand here forever. You can ask me questions about Jewell later. Okay.